So we're going to get right into it because we got limited time. And since Kamal threw out the challenge, he's up the bat.
All right, first. I'm going to hit the 15 minutes. You guys are going to hear a little alarm going to go off after the 15-minute mark, so you can take your time. I'll start now.
All right, peace, fam. My name is Kamal Makesi-Tehuti, and I want to welcome everyone who's tuning in to this important discussion. To start off with a quote right off the bat from Dr. Makesi-Tehuti, we, as black people, have been told we are not Africans for so long, and with such social scientific, quote-unquote, expertise, that we have great difficulty believing otherwise. We are Africans in America. Now, let me set out a few quick definitions. When I say we, I'm talking about stolen Africans in America. When I talk about Africans, I'm talking about there's three groups of Africans: those who never left, those who voluntarily left and first populated all the land masses of the world, and the third group involuntarily left, and that's us. I'm going to specify us here in America. When I speak of America, I'm speaking of white folks, Caucasoids. They conquered America. It's their reality that's running the place. So that's what I mean when I speak on America. Now, I'm sure that Asar and some of his listeners feel that he's arguing from a point of common sense. Y'all are probably saying, while I may have some African shit in me, of course, we Americans, what's this dude Kamal talking about? Everyone knows we Americans. One lesson we should have learned a long time ago is that if anything seems like common sense in this place, we better look at it 3, 4, 5, 6 times. The next problem with this supposed common sense approach is that it's wrong. And the last problem with the approach that we are Americans is that just saying it on multiple levels benefits Caucasoids in their society. Now, my opening statements have a dual purpose, attempting to anticipate what Asar is going to say and squashing that, as well as laying out my side. So in the first part, it was supposed to be the methodological pitfalls of Asar Imhotep and the ideological pitfalls of Asar Imhotep. But I want to start with laying out my part as far as how we're still Africans, and hopefully if I have time, I can come back into the pitfalls. Dr. Shenkar Tijel, who Mr. Imhotep is very familiar with, states that when dealing with questions of identity, we must go back to our most remote origins. Dr. Makesi again says, the argument of the European is all too easy for us to accept. We look around us, and while in the Caribbean and South America, African retentions are quite visible. But African existence in North America is problematic. How are we African, we ask? We do not know where to look for continuity. Not knowing ourselves, we have not known how to recognize manifestations of our heritage. We must learn to look primarily on a much deeper level than which has been emphasized by the Europeans, just as African culture itself can only be understood on its deepest level. If we look deep enough, we'll find that our deepest beliefs are shared beliefs, and deep within us, we are one people. As Asar in his book chooses to quote Dr. Clark on his identity, land, history, and culture, I want to use the quote from the master teacher that deals with this. Quote, Dr. Clark, the African living in the Western Hemisphere should be sensitive to the fact that the slave ships coming from Africa to so-called New World brought over no West Indians, no Black Americans, no African Americans, no South Americans. They brought African people who had to adjust to the conditions where the slave ships put them down. We are Africans with Amerikanisms. Baba Ajay Mamakwia Koto wrote a masterful piece in 2005 titled Definition and Direction in African Identity in their Sankofa Journal. Due to time, I'll just keep it quick. The 5 areas they talk about is spirit, biogenetic history, culture, history, and psychic function, and language falls in the psychic function. Let's jump to spirit. Inyame, Odumakuman, Oludumare, Kla, Nga, Quoth, and all other African names for the creative aspects of the universe, or what Caucasoids call God, created us as Africans. And they our first ancestors. The African deities tell us what is given by the Creator cannot be taken by any man. When you look at how Africans conceptualize the human being, all have some aspect that directly links back to the Creator. In focusing on West Africa, the Asante call it the Okra. The Gilimasaba call it Yi Anu, or God's consciousness. Same for the Yoruba, same for the Igbo. The most recent 500 years of our existence cannot and has not wiped that out of our identity construct. Our consciousness of that has been shrouded and tainted, and that can easily be getting back once we consciously and deliberately reconnect to her wisdom. That's the problem with having all this laid out. You lose some stuff.
Take your time. You got 9 minutes left.
Yeah, but I got a lot though. Among the vast majority of Africans, the conceptualization of self-identity has been distorted, and their personality construct has been profoundly and adversely affected. This is the consequence of our continued interaction with and proximity to the superordinate system of white supremacy in the West. The spiritual core is, however, unaffected. And focusing back on the spirituality piece, I found it again. While we are deliberately misled to look at culture only on the surface level, because it's that level where the manifestations can change easiest, the other two levels, which hopefully I'll get into, is the area we really need to look at: cosmology, epistemology, axiology. So since we're talking on spirit, we stolen Africans do not relate to the creative forces the way Caucasoids do. Even with the false religion of Christianity, we brought Africa into it with our emphasis on music during the services. We brought spirit into it by shouting and moving, which are direct carryovers from our traditional spiritual experiences, just reduced and confined within Christianity. We brought the call and response system into Christianity and other systems. And we tend not to separate the spirit from the physical, the separation of church and state that's foreign to us. Now, if we look at biogenetics, I'm waiting for someone to give me a refutation on Dr. Diop and his findings in molecular biology. Quote, molecular biology has isolated racial markers, which are factors almost exclusively localized in each racial group. The Diego factor among the yellows or Asians, the Kell factor among Caucasoids, and the Sutter and GM6 factors among the blacks. That's from Civilization and Barbarism. In African Origins of Civilization, Myth or Reality, he talks about 11 ways that he came up with to create, to explain the racial and cultural makeup of the ancient Kemetic Nasut, or pharaohs. He came up with a melanin dosage test. And if we use that test today, we can ascertain the biological Africanists of brothers on 125th Street in Harlem down to the sisters up in the rural areas of Aquapem, Ghana. Lastly, not even lastly, the simplest, most overlooked aspect of our continued Africanism is the majority of stolen Africans worldwide, and especially here in New Europe, still possess the high outer melanin content. With all the rape, sleep and foul, all of that, the overwhelming majority of us could be dropped off anywhere on the continent, and if we don't open our mouths, we'll be immediately perceived as Africans. Now, instead of building on top of that phenotypic victory, my verbal combatant will shoot that in the foot and claim the disruptor of African identity as his primary identity, like one suffering from Stockholm Syndrome, identifying with the abuser. I could go on with that. I got a quote from Amos Wilson, but I want to move into linguistics. So spiritually, I've tried to prove that we're still African. Biogenetically, I've tried to prove we're still African. Linguistically, linguist Ernie Smith, in his lecture, The Ebonics Debate, linguist Geneva Smitherman, in Talking and Testifying and in Black Talk, have shown conclusively that while we may speak English words, we have brought over our West African language systems. To quote her on our language, it involved the substitution of West African words for English words, but within the same structure and idiom that characterizes West African language patterns, syntactical structure and idiomatic rules. These two areas of language remain relatively rigid and fixed over time. We can go into that even more, and just on how we talk. Our tense is sometimes defined by context, whether versus proper conjugation of the verb. One example is the way we use be. He be late all the time. In English, we're supposed to say he has been late all the time. But within our West African language systems, we are still speaking correct. Even Asante chimes in on it. The verb systems is Twi, Igbo, all Niger Congo, and a whole lot of other West African languages exhibit a similar lack of inflection to show time. Past, present, and future times sometimes are indicated by context rather than verbal inflection. We've got the consonant clusters within English where you have two consonants ending or beginning at a word. We're told that that's bad English. We'll say, and we'll test, best, or west. Black folks usually say west, best, and test. We drop off that last consonant. The reason because of that, our West African language systems usually follow consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. So we're not speaking incorrect English. We're speaking proper West African language systems. And I got more examples. But to zoom to that, we are still speaking our West African language systems with English words. So I've attempted to do the linguistic piece. I know I'm about to run out of time. I still got plenty of examples on the cultural piece. I've got some examples from the psychology angle. How much time I got, sir? A minute and a half?
You got 4 minutes.
All right. Culture. Culturally. Culture is simply defined as a process which gives people a general design for living and patterns for interpreting their reality. I spoke on cosmology within the deep structure of culture. Again, you have coming from Wade Nobles, you have the surface manifestations of culture, which can easily be tainted by cultural invasion. You have the middle area, what I call the ideational or ideological aspects of culture, and then you have the deepest levels, which is called the assumptions level. When you really start looking at these Africanisms, and I'm going to get into that hopefully later, you find that they're not just all on the surface level. They are some deep-level stuff that we are redoing today. We just don't call it African because crackers won't let us call it African, and we don't know to call it African. You've got, for epistemology, multidimensional perception orientation. That's coming from Dr. Kobe Kambal. That's just a whole bunch of big words to say. While we use our five senses, we also use intuition. We also use precognition. We also deal with feeling vibes about a situation. That didn't just happen when we came over here to this damn continent. That came with us from Africa. And, oh, God, so much. I'm only dealing with a tenth of the information that's out there. We still remember and acknowledge our ancestors and dead loved ones in a myriad of culturally connected ways. We don't speak ill of them due to their ancestral status. Hell, today we even create T-shirts with their faces on it. We pour liquor out for them in libation-style form. And anyone who's been to an authentic African ritual on the continent sees a libation at the beginning of every service or every gathering to call upon the benefits of the spirit and to acknowledge those that's passed. We still do that. They didn't just come over here. They didn't just pop into our head. We was down in the South, like Thomas Sowell says. That is a African retention that we still deal with, and that's on the deep level, the axiological level. The larger African population in America unconsciously displays their Africanness every day in some very surface, but more importantly, deeper and profound ways. Then there are an ever-growing number of stolen Africans in America who are consciously and deliberately displaying their Africanness with African-centered independent schools, quote-unquote altars in their houses dedicated to deities or their ancestors. The Africanisms that Caucasoids, quote-unquote, discovered that we display is nothing more than our natural, innate self showing itself within a foreign reality. The foreign reality, of course, will create confusion around identity and get those of us who are confused to help in that confusion for their benefit. The so-called Africanisms are continuations of at least 200,000 years of African socialization. So again, on the cultural level, I tried to show that we are still Africans. There's more information. I know I'm going to run out of time. We, as black people, have been told that we are not African for so long and with such social scientific, quote-unquote, expertise, we have great difficulty believing otherwise. Go ahead. Because I don't want y'all to cut me off, so I just stopped there.
Oh, okay. Yes, and you're right on time.
I got more, but
it's about 14 seconds left, so you're right on time.
Okay. So that's the opening salvo. I'm going to put you on hold, and then I'm going to bring in a star. Hold on 1 second.
Yep, that was it.
Asar.
Perfect timing.
Asar, you there?
Yes, I am.
All righty. So anytime you're ready, let the ambassador know, and he can hit the timer.
All righty. First, I want to, in the chat room, I'm throwing a link in the chat room to my notes so people can follow along with me and have it after this particular discussion. So, and just for people in the archives, just in case they don't, they're not listening live, just visit www.asarmhotep.com, and the link is on the home page so we can follow the discussion. So, again, I just put it in the chat room so people can visit. Hopefully it comes up for them. And I'm ready when you're ready. All right,
Asar. You on.
Okay. The position I'm taking this evening is we are Americans with Afrikanisms. We're going to reevaluate what it means to be African in the fullest sense of this identification issue. Objectives for this evening is to discuss and provide evidence for the notion that African Americans, who I call the Bakala, are Americans with Afrikanisms, to expand our current conceptualizations of human identity on a micro and macro level, to address the current limitations in our general conceptualizations of culture and identity, to open up a new dialogue on what it means to be African American, Bakala, and to formulate strategies to use our identity, that which is being developed, as an instrument of power, which is going to be very important to this discussion, to reconceptualize, categorize, and organize the world we live in, to provide workable definitions of culture, to have a conceptual framework in which to forge meaningful relationships with each other in the developing Pan-African community. On to the next slide. The critical research questions up for debate tonight are, of course, are we Africans with Amerikanisms or are we Americans with Africanism? What constitutes the isms? What is African and what is American? Are these definitions based on biology or culture or both? If biology, by what scientific criterion can we conclusively define race? What are the limitations of such an analysis? If by culture, how do we define culture? How do we measure and evaluate its presence? What is the goal, mission of culture, and can these goals be used to forge an identity of a people? My formal stance, of course, is that we are Americans with Africanisms, just in case people did not know. Next slide. The reason for my current stance is based on this. Based on the rules and the roles of culture and the amount of publications calling for a united African state, African culture, as culture is defined, does not exist. I believe identity is based on culture, not biology. So my stance is cultural, not biological. Many persons base their notions of an African identity solely on biology, which the scientific field of genetics prevents one from logically utilizing this as an explanatory model. According to paleoanthropology and genetics, all people are Africans and mainly carry African genes. It's just a matter of how far you want to go back, which presents many problems for those who use biology to define what is African. If one tries to argue based on skin color, what's the color index ratio from which to judge Africanness? As an example, I have a brother who has the same skin color as Southeast Asians with a similar nasal index. Is he no longer African because he matches the colors of the Southeast Asians, or are Southeast Asians Africans because they have colors of some Africans, especially in the North and Northeast? What phenotypic characteristics define an African when Africans have every single phenotype on the planet Earth? from thin to thick noses, from thin to wide lips, etc. Continue on the next slide. If we are Africans, in the fullest sense in which we have this term, we understand this term, then these books would have never, ever, ever been written. The first one is Black Africa, an Economic and Cultural Basis for a Federated State by Dr. Shekhan Diop. If anybody has ever read this book, they know for a fact that the argument that he is making and what he's always been doing since the beginning of his career, his academic and political career and linguistic or whatnot, is trying to find a unifying what we call the substratum cultural elements of Africa to use as a basis to unite Africa culturally, because Africa does not have a unified culture. It has a substratum. And we'll see later on in the discussion why Africa does not have a whole unified culture and what defines a culture. And he was using this as a basis to create federated states because they do not have one, because they do not see themselves as one people and one language and things of this nature. We'll understand what language is, how language is important to this discussion as well. Afrikanisms in American Culture by Joseph Holloway, which breaks down, the whole book is just about Afrikanisms that are present in the American and African-American cultural expressions and thought or whatnot. Souls of Black folks with the whole double consciousness, battling this European mindset that we have and recognizing this African mindset that we bring over here, how we have this double consciousness and awareness. Afrocentricity by Makesi-Tehuti. If we were Africans, we wouldn't have to be re-Africanized. Thus, why would Makesi-Tehuti write a book on Afrocentricity and trying to inform us on how to be African? The same thing with Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery by Dr. Naeem Akbar, another book, and there's countless other books that we can cite, where everybody is trying to convince us on the benefits of adopting an African psychological or framework in which to see the world. Next slide. We Are Amerikkans in the Literature. This is from Blueprint for Black Power by Dr. Amos Wilson, page 63. We must no longer, through the abuse of reality, denial, and distortion, fail to recognize that our basic identities as an oppressed people are largely socially manufactured by white-dominated American culture and its related social practices in which we as a people are immersed. African-American cultural identity and behavioral orientations as currently defined are functionally defined to perpetuate self-negating, self-defeating, and under circumstances, self-destructive behavior in Black Americans. The salvation, empowerment, and liberation of African peoples require an appropriate, thorough, pragmatic cultural analysis of the deculturalization deculturalization and the reculturation of ourselves by dominant European peoples, of reactionary Black culture and their social products as represented by reactionary Black identity. Now you have to wonder, why would we have to deculturalize if we are culturally African? Obviously, it has to do something with the psychology, the understanding of meanings and things of this nature, which we'll get into a little later. So as Brother Kamal has mentioned, some of these Africanisms, I'll name just a few to add on to what he was talking about. Like, some people think that eating chitterlings is something that the white man gave us, that it was some scraps that we got from the white man and the pig or whatnot, but that's not true. Chitterlings are an African invention. And Robert Ferris Thompson, when he did his studies in Africa, found people in Central Africa eating chitterlings. This is something that we brought over here to America as a cuisine, quote unquote. The concept of the front porch. The front porch is an African design. Of course, we're the ones who built this nation and incorporated these in the houses in which we designed. Our serial verbalization, in which he mentioned earlier. We're talking about serial verbalization, which is the concept of taking adding two or more verbs in the same clause in a sentence. The example I give is, I took consideration and joined the Lord, which it would be reinterpreted in English, quote unquote. It would be, I accepted religion, I became Christian. The African concept of time. Well, we know that African Americans, we have a very lax sense of time, which we call CPT time. It's because African people judge things by general events, not by calculated specific time. The example I give is when we talk about a song, for instance. Oh, that song came out freshman year, not like August of 1998. We don't give specific times. We give general event-based time, so to speak. The whole call and response, the oral traditions, the ritual possession and dances in the church, even the southern accent that is present, that is distinguishedly present, is an African thing. And I've cited a link that people can click on later, which the author claims that the accent is basically due to Mande speakers from the South. So now, what is culture? The meat of the argument. The meat of this argument. Next slide. Culture defined by Dr. Wade Nobles. Technically, and I have the citation at the bottom, so technically culture is a vast structure of behaviors, ideas, attitudes, values, habits, beliefs, customs, language, rituals, ceremonies, practices peculiar to a particular group of people, which provides them with a general design for living and patterns for interpreting reality. Next slide. Dr. Amos Wilson, quoting Horton and Hunt, provide a workable answer to this question of what is culture. From their life experiences, a group develops a set of rules and procedures for meeting their needs. The set of rules and procedures, together with a supporting set of ideas and values, is called a culture. Kluckhohn has defined culture as all the historically created designs for living, explicit and implicit, rational and irrational, and non-rational, which may exist at any given time as potential guides for the behavior of man. So all of these definitions are dealing with a psychology. It is a consciousness that defines culture, which also has a set of meaning and purposes, which we'll get into the next slide. Dr. Amos Wilson, again, on the Blueprint for Black Power, page 59, goes into this a little bit more deeply. He says, thus, culture, though a product of the actual lived experience of a people, the primal source of much of their daily personal and social activities, their forms of labor and its products, their celebratory and ceremonial traditions, modes of dress, art and music, language and articulatory style, appetites and desires, is essentially ideological in nature, based as it is on shared beliefs, customs, expectations, and values. Cultural constructs, definitions, meanings, and purposes. These cultural constructs are used to proactively and reactively mold the mind, body, spirit, and behavior of the constituent members of a culture. These active constructs become the cultural and social heritage of the members of the particular culture. Again, when we get into this thing, we're talking about constructs, we're talking about definitions, we're talking about meanings, and ultimately we're talking about purposes. Culture is done on purpose. People organize and they sit there and define what the culture is. This has never happened in African American history. We don't know. We haven't sat down and defined what it is that our culture means to us, what its purposes is, defining the certain things. That's why I like what Brother Kamal was talking about. We have these culturalisms, but we don't know what they mean, what they're used for. This is why I add that we should get this book, Africanisms in American Culture, so you can find out what these cultural things mean. Part of having a culture is having an institute in which to transfer this knowledge of the meanings and the nuances. We don't have that because there's no such thing as an African American nationwide educational system like the Jews have, or the Asians have in each of their respective cities and things of this nature. On to the next slide. Culture as an investment. This is taken from, and this is actually from Dr. Gordon. I forgot to put his name on the slide, but the book is called Introduction into Africana Philosophy, page 71. It says the anti-black racist argument is that the absence of black contribution to civilization suggests that humankind could do well without black people. Cooper's response was that worth, and we'll deal with this worth in terms of self-esteem if we have a chance, was a function of what an individual produced in relation to that which was invested in him or her. And invested means education, the whole concept of planting. So when we're talking about culture, next slide, I provide this language reference, and I could provide many more African language references. But when we're talking about culture, culture is a agricultural term. So in the Seluba language, they have this word called kanga, which is a farm, which you'll find, and I don't have time to go into the linguistics.
You got 1 minute. You got 1 minute or so.
Okay. The whole concept of kanga is a farm. The word nkuna means to plant or to invest. The word kanda is land, community, and ethnicity. The same words for culture is the same words used for investment. So what they're talking about is that which the community invests in the people to produce a certain type of person. And as time goes on, we'll get into the deeper meanings of these things and these nuances and the whole purposes of everything, which define a culture in the process of language and the education system. But I end there.
All righty. So those are the opening statements. The structure of the debate after this is going to be the rebuttals. We're going to have, after the rebuttals, 3 direct questions from each participant to the other, and then we're going to have the conclusion. So right now, since we're pressed for time, we're going to go into the rebuttals, and I'm going to put
how much time is that?
on hold. Same thing. 15.
Okay.
Yeah.
I apologize for you guys. I'm going to let you know at the 2 minute mark that you have 2 minutes left.
You might want to, hit your button on your phone after 2 minutes, because that way, you don't have to break in. They can hear the tone, and then they'll know.
Okay.
So, Brother Kamal, you on?
Yep.
All right. So whenever you wait ready to start your rebuttal, you can give Ambassador the cue.
Yep. All right. I'm ready.
All right.
So while we heard some pretty decent information, this moves right into the other area of my opening statements, the methodological pitfalls of Asar-Imhotep and the ideological pitfalls of Asar-Imhotep. It seems like, I don't know how else to say it, these sort of half-reads or sort of reads, and in a minute I'll show how he misreads some of the authors he uses in his text or recommends on his blog talk shows. Authors who, if they're fully read, would show their own contradiction with Asar's point of us being Americans. Now, again, people who he do not mention, ironically enough, are people who take the position we're Africans. One of those people is Dr. Kobe Cambone, who precisely contradicts Asar's position. Quote, "The African world has bought into the white supremacy domination logic that brutality and terror can actually transform the natural racial cultural condition of humanity from one race, culture, identity to another." And he finishes up by saying, "It seems to me that can only hold logic under the belief into the veracity of the assumption of European superiority over the African race." Basically, they can transform our consciousness, but they cannot transform our identity. And when we buy into that, we buy into white folks are God and they're just all powerful and we just got to succumb to them. The African deities tell us the only way a culture dies is when the people die. Now, Asar has mentioned and recommended Dr. Foucault's works before. In his brilliant work, Self-Healing, Power, and Therapy, Foucault speaks of a genetic rope, one that binds the community of the living with the community of the so-called dead. The Congo people call it Nsinga di Kanda Waninga. I just like the way that flows. Nsinga di Kanda Waninga. They say the community rope rings never break. The community biogenetic rope or linkage is eternal. No one breaks it or gets away from it. He continues, there is truth that cannot be denied in this African old teaching. All biogenetic community members are linked one to another. This biogenetic, end quote, this biogenetic unseen rope ties all Africans essentially to their lineage mates, past, present, and future. But to see the deep merit in this statement, one must identify with Africa, have positive disposition towards Africa and her age-old wisdom on her terms, and then it can be used to transform one's life. It's much harder to grasp, even if it can be, starting consciously from the perspective of identifying with Americans. So basically, Asar is saying, Nsinga Dikanda Waninga no longer exists, but an author he says he's familiar with contradicts his position. Now, I mentioned half-read, but now this is a total misread on Brother Asar's part. On page 5 of his book, Makala, he's laid out that where he feels we're American, we're Africans. He says, to be fully acculturated in someone's traditions, you have to be born within the society. There's no way you can transplant culture fully from one geo-social unit to another. That's coming from Asar's book. Maybe he hasn't heard the saying, while you may not be born in Africa, Africa is born in you. He then proceeds to misread Dr. Noble's work to further his point that we're not Africans. Page 43 through 50 in Makala is where he displays Noble's 9 cultural precepts and 8 cultural themes that manifest in African people wherever we are on the globe. While Asar uses these points to try to say that we're not African, Dr. Noble directly contradicts it. And let me share 2 of those points with you. Page 325 in Seeking the Saku, Baba Noble says, and I quote, our ancestral and spiritual connections were not severed or destroyed by the circumstances of enslavement, just as the ancestral rights and spiritual connections of our brothers and sisters in Africa were not destroyed or severed by colonialism. We are all African people. Those of us living in the United States remain an African people. Again, the quote from the real Dr. Wade Nobles, we recognize that there exists a fundamental core of dissimilarity between Africans and Europeans. We blacks are African people by virtue of our genetic and cultural ancestral heritage. African Americans are African people who have been separated from their natural environment and have been incarcerated in European American conceptions of reality. Dr. Noble, even in his seminal work, Voodoo IQ, that he did with Dr. Akbar and Cedric X, helped get a lot of other black psychologists to begin to look at Africa for healing modalities for stolen African people in America. The hell, they wouldn't have did that if they thought we were Americans. All of his other works, if you fully read them, continue down that premise that today we are African people. He was not creating those precepts and themes to show how we were some unique American group. He created them to show that we are still African at deep and profound levels, even in this Ma'afa experience. These scholars were the mass of Dr. Noble's work seems to contradict Asar's position. These scholars were nationalists. They wrote for African people's well-being, and none of them stated that stolen Africans are actually Americans with Africanisms. As one reads the totality of Fouquial's work, of Amos Wilson's work, who, if you keep going on page 64, he says, certainly the answers lie in the direction of the reclamation of our African identity and the reconstitution of our African-centered consciousness. Not the creation, not pulling it out of thin air, reclaiming it and reconstituting it, i.e., it never left, but Falsification of African Consciousness, the title of another one of his books, our consciousness has been changed, not our identity. And that's the point I want to make going into the ideological pitfalls of Asar Imhotep. We agree a transformation has taken place. We diverge in that he sees a total core transformation of identity. I see it as a transformation of consciousness. Now, as otherwise brilliant my debater is in some of his other stuff, he's fallen prey to this quote I'm about to say now. African studies focused on the geographical identity of Africa rather than the movement and development of its people, thus suggesting Africans who were forcibly brought to the United States and elsewhere stop being African. This claim is a cultural and political stance which rejects the reality of African cultural historical continuity. This has basically been done by every Caucasoid and every Caucasoid-thinking author researcher since the inception of the discipline. That's why Myths of Negro Past by Herskovitz, the other book he loves to talk about, Afrikanisms in American culture, which I do have, and all others, they never even bring up the question, are we still Africans? They start from the default position that when the ships landed, we magically became tabula rasa, a totally blank cultural slate, and were transformed into Americans, and it's surprising to some of these researchers that Afrikanisms even exist. They've done that for a purpose, and I don't know how, I don't know why, but Asar, unfortunately, has fallen prey for that. And again, we want to look at the depth level of where these Afrikanisms are coming from. He mentioned the ports and some food. That's surface level again. I said you had the real Wade Nobles talks about surface level, ideational level, and the assumptions level. The assumptions level is the deepest one. Axiology, cosmology, epistemology. And it seems like both of our research is showing that we still, on that deep fundamental level, got African carryovers. It's just now up to the listening audience to see, is that just some shit we came up with when we got to these shores, or have they come with us from the continent? We agree that we're not using them to our conscious benefit, but Marimba Ani and others are trying to reawaken that in us. We're not supposed to just throw it away, throw it off, it's no big thing. We're supposed to use it for our conscious benefit, and we won't get there identifying with America. How much time I got?
You got 5 minutes.
Oh, good. Set that already. Again, we got to look at these Afrikanisms and white folks dealing with them, and black folks with white minds dealing with them. They start from the perspective, we are Americans. We've been fully converted. They've been doing this successfully since the 1480s. So yes, seeing behaviorisms that are connected to Africa pop up in us in this aspect of life, this aspect of life, this aspect of life, will seem strange to them, not to us. When you understand the actual reality that a full disconnection from our Africanness did not and cannot happen, the relation to the information about continued African existence in this foreign land should be an inspiration and fuel to continue your own personal conscious and deliberate displaying of your Africanness. But then, if you look at it from the right perspective, these Africanisms are the empirical evidence that we're still Africans. But if you don't look at it that way, it's just some random stuff that we just happen to do. But that's the empirical evidence. But now let's move here. We must begin to control the context which our Africanisms express itself so we can benefit from it more. Now, Brother Asar wants us to believe that since we do not know the meanings behind our many daily Africanisms, that we are Americans because of this. And he said as much from here. What I say to his meanings and reason argument is the problem with that is you go up to the common people of any classical or traditional society at any time, past or now, and another brother even told him that on his own blog talk show, Does an African American Nation Exist?, that it's unlikely that you'll be able to get the deep intellectual breakdowns and the symbology and the spiritual meanings of what is asked. Just because the common people can't break down those spiritual concepts, does that really mean they cease to exist as a people? Does that really mean they cease to exist and now new terms need to be created for them? Or more correctly, for the deeper meanings behind things, you go to the ones that are learned in the depth in the populace, in the deeper aspects for those answers. Loss of cultural meaning among the populace could be an indicator of cultural stagnation, however, which can be remedied, but it does not signify cultural extinction, as Brother Asar is claiming. I haven't heard the 2 minutes yet, but
no, it's not yet.
To quote Dr. Linda James Myers, the highest levels of positive identity development cannot be achieved without making a conceptual shift away from the dominant suboptimal belief system. Without that switch, materialist values and faulty orientation of basing one's worth on external criteria will likely inhibit one's capacity to see black people as positive in comparison to white people. There's no way around it. I mean, he gave a few surface examples. There seems to be a strand of misreading or not reading fully from Baba Amos to Fukuyao to Wade Nobles. Go ahead. Oh.
No, 2 minutes. I'm sorry.
That's kind of long. No, okay. The Journal of Black Psychology is a treasure trove of research being done to get a grasp on this identity question. Dr. Cambone conducted one study dealing with his worldview scale. He looked at 94 Africans and 87 European college students ranging from 17 to 52, and it was contrasting the African worldview with the European worldview. Some of the items were harmony with nature versus control of nature, spiritualism versus materialism. Let me quote, "The findings revealed, as expected, that African males and females scored significantly more consistent with an African worldview orientation on 5 of the 7 dimensions, while European males and females scored significantly more Eurocentric on 6 or 7 of the worldview dimensions. This study indicates that worldview differences do appear to be basic in the beliefs, attitudes, and perceptions of contemporary Africans and Europeans in America, despite centuries of forced cultural assimilation of the African into the European worldview." We are Africans with Amerikkanisms. That's how I end that.
All righty.
Great. Always great timing, Kamasi. Warming up.
All right. So we're going to bring in, thank you for that. We're going to bring in Nassar. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, let me reset.
All righty. For his rebuttal. And anytime you're ready, just let Ambassador know, Nassar.
Yeah, you hear me?
Yep.
All right. I'm ready.
Okay.
All right. It was an interesting rebuttal, but I must state for the record that there's a difference between someone who reads and a researcher. A researcher is someone who reads material but looks for things in which the material does not say. A person who researches asks new research questions. It doesn't just read material and say that this is true because somebody put it in the book. But since we're citing resources, we're going to continue along this line. Since I did not read all of the 900 pages of Blueprint for Black Power, I did read page 58, according to him. On page 58, I'm still on my slides. So we went from, I think it was like 14, now we're on 16. On the slide for those who are still on the slide. Page 58 of Blueprint for Black Power says, this coalescence of subcultural social units is usually organized and motivated by a mutually recognized leadership, a governing establishment. This establishment usually fulfills its responsibilities through the creation, issuance, and enforcement of policies. At this level of organization, a culture may be defined as a political organization, which exercises political power in its defense, economic, social, and social interests as a whole, in the interest of the subcultural group and individual members. My argument here is that without a governing body, you do not have a culture. That's why I recommended the book Black Africa by Sheikh Anta Diop, because this is something that he recognized, that in order for there to be a political state, there has to be the unifying culture, and vice versa. They're not separate. And this is why all the states have failed every time they try to unite, because they try to make the states come together without trying to unify the cultures. But we're going to go further on this. We're going to go to the next slide, which deals with language. And this is what's going to be important, because he he quotes Malefe Asante, but of course, with him not being a linguist, he doesn't know what he's quoting. What he is quoting is syntax, the structure of how a language is said, in which the serial verbalizations and things of this nature can be found in many other so-called non-African languages. That doesn't distinguish you and make you African. But let's go to Dr. Mubinge Bilolo. In his recent book that just came out, it's called, and I'm going to translate it from the French, it's The Invisibility and Immanence of the Creator Amen. I translated this from the French, and let's see what he discusses when it comes to this whole concept of language. He says, this use of European language, he's talking about how the European Egyptologists try to make the language of Egypt sound more European or Arabic and things of this nature. But anyway, this use of European languages in Arabic, Arab, Berber, or Kabyle, stifles and pulls down the African, destroys the African languages. The African nations will lose the use of their languages, being slaves to albino, which is basically white Eurasian culture, but also slaves to their neighbors. A man who loses the use of his mother tongue is an idiot. A nation that agrees to exchange its tongue for the language of the colonizer is an aggregate of idiots, at least in part of those in the diaspora or being born in diaspora. The African who does not speak his mother tongue is what they call a siluba, silua, lost, alienated. Is also into, worthless. Language is the library of a nation. It is for each nation, and some of these words I'm saying now are going to be Saluba words. The inyo, the simao, the mother, the origin, the cause. Inyina a bikala, mother of existence or the form of existence, of the color or the manner of being. It is also dinan or sinine, the matrix or the sinu, the foundation, the basis, the into, being, the being of culture, which is dikala. Again, that's Dr. Bilolo. Talks about how you lose a language. Now let's go to another African, very prominent scholar by the name of Amadou Hapati-Ba. I quote this on page 5 of the Bacalo of North America, which he skipped as well. In his Aspects de la Civilisation Africaine, Personnel, Culture, and Religion, the Fulani are accustomed to saying that the individual is made up of three essential things. And this is not on the slideshow. I'm reading from my book. That the individual is made up of three essential things: his physical aspect, his speech, and his work, his trade. He can lose one or two of these three qualities without ceasing to be himself. But the day he loses the third, he becomes someone else. He is no longer his ethnicity. So you can keep your trade. Of course, you can't lose your physicality. But once you lose your speech, you lose your ethnicity. Amadou Hapati-Ba has said this, also Muba Binge. It's another book that I recently acquired. It's called The Book of Dawn and Invocations by Dr. Agona Agu. I won't have time to quote because the quotes are scattered. But for anybody who has this book, he is an Igbo priest. And when he grew up in Nigeria, he only spoke English, didn't know much about his Igbo heritage. Not until he went into college and decided, I want to learn more about who I am. And then this is when he went on the path of the priesthood. The whole introduction to this book is talking about how he had to go and learn his language and how language is important to being a Nigerian and Igbo. An Igbo Nigerian. So the question becomes, how can an African on the African continent have to re-Africanize himself by learning the language? Why are all of these Africans talking about the psychology and the speech of things? Let's take this further. I'm going next on the slide. Language is a source of identity. In Flash of the Spirit, African and Afro-American Art, Art and Philosophy, page 16, Robert Ferris Thompson explains the nuances that make the Yoruba people Yoruba. The Yoruba remain the Yoruba precisely because their culture provides them with the ample philosophic means for comprehending and ultimately transcending the powers that periodically threaten to dissolve them. In other words, they are conscious. They use their culture to amass power. and to be able to meet the challenges of their time. These are the defining things of culture. What is culture used for? Next slide. Culture as a meaning of generating power mechanism. Blueprint for Black Power, page 59. A culture generates effective power when it aligns its subcultural, social, and individual units, especially its family and communal units, in such a way that they can most effectively create and exploit its human, social, and material resources to its advantage relative to its environment and other groups. That means it's not enough to just have a culture. You have to use your culture in a way that it helps you build industries and things of this nature. Next, culture as power. This is also reinforced. You know, he quotes Dr. Clark, but I'm not sure he's really that versed on the wide body of his work. This I just took from one of his speeches. So there's the link to the YouTube clip. And starting at 3 minutes and 45 seconds, this is what he talks about. He says, how did you get in this predicament that you are in today, where you are totally unprepared to run a nation? What I am talking about tonight is how you lost the concept of controlling a nation. Until you get the concept of nation formation and the nation management, you're going to have difficulty with or without apartheid. You have to prepare to control every item in a nation that needs to hold that nation together. The title of this is that Black Liberation was a bunch of talk. And in this, the whole series of clips, which is, the whole lecture, he's talking about how Africans lost the African concept of running a nation. This is what culture does. Culture, as Dr. Amos Wilson had talked about earlier, is a political organization. Unless you are willing to come out of thin air and say that Black Americans have a political organization, that we have a political thing that matches the political things like in Mbongi, if you want to quote Dr. Fukiao in his work in Mbongi, where he describes the political organization in the Congo. Unless you are willing to compare the so-called African political organization, which one does not exist, to that which you find on the African continent in the individual cities, one can't argue that one has an African culture, because African culture is a political system. And this political system with people that have bona fide leaders that the people recognize that help shape the policies in which the Africans or anybody else in the world is going to follow. So now when we talk about these so-called African nuances, in my direct questions, I would ask him exactly what distinguishes African culture from Native American culture or Southeast Asian culture. And that's something that we don't understand. And why, in the final analysis, when anthropologists and when the Africans, especially the ones I just quoted, talk about culture, it ultimately boils down to language. Because language fossilizes the worldview of the people. If you don't have the vocabulary, just having the African syntax does not make it a language. That's just like you speaking, like you say, uno, dos, tres. That doesn't mean that you know that you speak the Spanish. That doesn't constitute. It's a whole consciousness. It's a whole way of being. And if your first language is English, that means your whole paradigm is that of a European. The way that you look at the world, the way that you categorize the world is European. So, these are some questions that you have to ask yourself. How is culture defined? I'm on a different slide. The next slide. How is culture designed to solve the problems, to meet the needs of the people? It has to be measured by those standards. Does it solve all problems? If your culture doesn't solve your problems, it is inadequate and should be modified to meet the 1001 challenges of life. We have to ask ourselves some critical questions. We must define the nature of our problems and the source from which they derive. Are these problems we witness today as a result of African culture? Is African culture the problematic? Or is it the lack of African culture which is at the root of these pathologies? And to rephrase that, is African culture the problem or the lack of African culture the problem? So when we talk about, culture, how are we using our African culture to meet all of these challenges? Why do we still have the highest, birth mortality rates? Why do we are number one in the health disparities and things of this nature in comparison to other immigrant groups who come there with their culture intact? Why are we still, on the lowest barrel of the financial realm? Why are we utilizing our culture, to elevate and to create these quote-unquote, like Africa towns and things of this nature? Why does everybody who comes here who's able to speak their languages, for instance, doing better than everybody? If I had time, I would have added this recent article which talks about Nigerians are the highest-ranking immigrants here. Why are they, saying the highest-ranking immigrants here? Because they come with their culture. Next comes under Latinos. Why would they do better coming over here and we're born here? Because they have a different cultural mindset and approach to things. They have a different educational value system, and that's another thing. It's your value system. What is it that you value? Are your values, really African? Are you fighting against homelessness? What is the overall? And I'm not talking about the Afrocentric African Americans. I'm talking about the general population. Is that 2 minutes?
Yeah, you got 2 minutes.
2 minutes. The general population. And to answer his question in regards to, as far as the average person in Africa, when you get there, they have what they call priesthood. The priesthood, the whole purpose of a priesthood is to be the preservers of the knowledge of the people. What is the African-American priesthood that preserves the nuances and the structures? Sure, the average person won't be able to give you every single detail, but they should be able to point to you, okay, well, these are the elders, the priest who knows all of these different things, which you can go to any African country, any African community, and find that out. So, it is a lot more than just simply having some vocabulary words that have survived, that have some dances that match. It is a political system, and African Americans don't have a political system. If you don't have a political system, you don't have a culture, because the culture is it's the organization of all of these isms which we're talking about. Everything that Kamal's talking about are loose isms. They're not organized. And until African Americans organize these isms, then it is not culture. Your worldview, everything that you value is European, and until you start speaking African languages, it is not African culture. And these are coming from Africans themselves. So, we have to expand our notions and not just read surfacely the material, and to figure out what is it that we are missing as far as the differences between a full-fledged African culture and that which we have now, especially when you compare us to people in Cuba and Brazil. It is not even close to the Africanism. But I am there to begin the next round.